We opened for classes in late August of 1970. I had been here 6 months already, helping plan and recruit faculty and just design everything, curriculum, program structure, even buildings. And I'm not an architect, but I sat in on the architects' meetings. So I had done a little bit of everything. I think my title was Assistant Vice President in Academic Affairs. And you have to understand that the campus was under construction when we started. In fact, we were delayed a little bit because the temporary classroom buildings hadn't been completed. And so this was a kind of a muddy wasteland out here, except for a handful of temporary buildings on the east side of what is now the campus. I also brought a copy, I'll even show it here, of the very first university catalog. It's pretty thin, and yet it took an enormous amount of work that summer to produce it because we were creating courses as we were writing the catalog. And so it's amusing now to look back on it. We tried to make it look impressive, but the fact of the matter is we were all kind of reacting intuitively to very challenging questions. I keep this as a keepsake because it is a memento of that founding year. It's a little hard to encapsulate all of the spirit, but certainly for me, and I think many students and faculty and staff, there was an enormous sense of excitement. Not just another campus in Illinois, but a campus with a special mission. And that excited all of us because we felt we were part of some great experiment in higher education. For us in our own lives, including students, this was a very new venture. We knew that we met a relatively ambivalent community which had desperately wanted a university, but had assumed that with that would come fraternities and sororities and college football games, which didn't happen, and it hasn't happened yet. So they were a little mystified by us, with one important exception. There were a good many adults who had either never begun a college education or who had had it interrupted by marriage or other experiences. They were eager to take courses. So even though we were designed to be an adult university anyway with only juniors and seniors, there also were a lot of 40, 50, 60, and even 70-year-old students who were coming somewhat nervously to try to finish a college education. They turned out to be the stars in those early years because they worked hard, they had life experience. And so for a small group of Springfield residents, this was a blessing. It opened their eyes and it appealed to them a great deal. Others in the community were a little more suspicious. They saw a faculty who largely wore sandals and were bearded, and so there was some suspicion in town that there was a monster being created. I found myself teaching courses in many areas, a lot of liberal or public affairs courses, as well as history courses. But for a lot of the time I was here, I was also an administrator of one kind or another, which meant that my actual teaching was rarely full-time teaching. Usually it was half-time or 1/3 time or 2/3 time. And so I was involved in a lot of other campus governance and administrative assignments to boot. One of those administrative assignments, and there were many, was the resignation of our founding university librarian in 1975, just as Brookins Library was completing construction. It was the very first, and for a long time, the only permanent building on campus. And it was my job as the acting dean for less than a year to oversee the library, to oversee its move to its new building. And that was really exciting because I felt there too I was part of a unique architectural design, concepts about library that were different than most other universities. And I liked it because, true to our president's vision, the library was designed to be the very center of campus and intellectual life. He was a very interesting man. And whatever there is that was and still is good about this university, I think is due to his vision, because he had very accurately diagnosed the ills of modern higher education as they were being experienced in the 60s and 70s. So he wanted a different kind of university. This was to be student-centered education. That is to say, we were there to teach students. But the mode of teaching was to be the use of inquiry. We wouldn't so much lecture as engage in discussion, which many students found unsettling. They preferred being hand-fed the facts, but they were called upon to actually interact in conversation. So these were all novelties to those students, and many of them were they were all adults. Average age was, I think, around 29 when we opened. They had jobs, many of them families, and so this was definitely a commuter campus. It's changed tremendously. And one of our ills for the first 25 years was that we operated within a fairly weak university governance system. I mean external governance. A governing board called the Board of Regents, which was not a very strong board with a lot of clout with the legislature. And as a result, we kind of starved to somewhat because we were the oddball in that system. The other two universities, Illinois State and Northern, were healthy, ongoing, relatively prestigious universities. We suffered from that, and so when the opportunity came to become part of the University of Illinois, while there was a lot of resistance on campus, by and large, I think it was a great help. We got help adding physically to the campus, and the best part of it to me is that much of that early student-centered spirit has remained. Now, I can say this university has earned its stature within Illinois. It still is relatively small, but I know there are people who respect it, and that's all you can request.